And if you look at the last few years in comparison to pre-COVID average, real GDP growth pre-COVID was 6.4%, and in FY25 was 6.5%, and this year, as I said, MOSPI is predicting 7.4%. Private final consumption expenditure growth is 7% for this year, on top of 7.2 last year. And in real terms, gross fixed capital formation is going to be a lot better than FY25, and definitely much better than the banking and corporate balance sheet crisis-ridden 2012-2020 period, when it grew only 6.3% on average per annum. More importantly, we are achieving these high growth rates, consumption and investment spending amidst very moderate inflation environment. This year, it is projected to be about 1.7% on average so far for the first 9 months of the year, largely due to a deflationary trend in food price index. However, it's important to note that core inflation is also well behaved. If you take out gold and silver, core inflation is 2.9, well below the 4% threshold with which the headline inflation is pursued by the central bank. So we basically have benign inflation trends. All the slides, you will see the chapters in which they are covered in great detail, and we will just give you a broad brushstroke of what those chapters are saying on those relevant topics. Moving on from GDP and inflation to public finances, in 21-22, the government said we would bring down the COVID year fiscal deficit to less than half, and we are about to deliver on that this year, with an estimated 4.4% of GDP as the union government fiscal deficit. More importantly, the primary deficit, which is revenue deficit minus interest payments, has come down from 5.7 and expected to be 0.8% this year. We achieved it through improvement in tax buoyancy, tax collections, while increasing and improving the quality of expenditure. Effective capex rate went up from 2.7 pre-COVID to 3.9% post-COVID as a percentage of GDP. And that is the reason why last year we got 3 credit rating upgrades, beginning with Morningstar DBRS in May, Standard & Poor in August, R&I investment ratings from Japan in September. And so we now have BBB from S&P, BBB plus from the other two, and also India's CARE Edge also rates Indian sovereign rating at BBB plus. External sector, the forex reserves have more than doubled, compared to 11 years ago, from 341 billion to 701 billion. While much of it is due to lately the increase in gold valuations, definitely there is an increased accretion of foreign exchange currencies as well. Therefore, the import cover has picked up to nearly a year from 8.9 months in FY15. The current account balance is very well behaved, from 1.3% of GDP to now to about 0.8% in the first half of the current financial year. And external debt, which was 23.8%, is now down to 19.2%. So the external sector doesn't flash any warning signals as far as the macro picture is concerned. And if you look at the financial sector, we basically had the second decade of the millennium was marked by balance sheet troubles and repair. That is now showing up. The repair process is now well done, and the gross non-performing asset ratio is 2.2%. The net non-performing asset ratio is down from 6% in 2017-18 down to just 0.5%. But more importantly, the flow of resources to the non-government or the commercial sector, including households and businesses, and not just the credit market, but including the equity market, non-banking finance, etc. The annual growth rate in the last 5 years has been 29%. There is ample resource availability in the system for economic activity and investment spending. In the current financial year, the growth rate is 45% in the first 9 months compared to last year's 9 months. So overall, the resource availability augurs very well, and the resource mobilization as well for continued growth in investment spending and capital formation in the economy, and this is for the commercial sector, not government. Employment conditions have improved from the year when PLFS, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, was launched. 6% was the unemployment rate then, down to 3.2% in 23-24. The PLFS used to follow a July to June cycle, and that is now becoming a calendar year-based cycle. Therefore, the data for 2025 will be released sometime in March, and that is why we are showing you 23-24 data. Female labor force participation rate is up nearly 18 percentage points, and the unemployment rate in the first 9 months of the year has been steadily declining from 5.4 down to 4.9% in the last quarter. Now, in terms of other inclusive growth parameters, apart from the macro indicators, in rural development, 81% of rural households now have access to tap water. 2.9 crore houses have been constructed and 2.76 crore property cards issued under Swamitwa. When it comes to healthcare, 14.3 crores beneficiaries registered on the UWIN portal, 42.8 crore Ayushman Bharat cards issued, 1.8 plus lakh Ayushman Arogya Mandirs operational. And we include online gaming in this because it matters for mental health. So the banning of online gaming does matter for mental health and also for your wallet's health. So that is why we included the Online Gaming Act, Regulation Act of 2025 in this category. When it comes to education, there was a concern that post-COVID, because of the school shutdown for long periods, there would be a slippage in functional literacy and numerical skills. But the latest annual State of Education report does give us very encouraging signs. Reading skills in grade 3 up to grade 2 level has picked up by about 3 percentage points compared to what they were a decade ago, And when it comes to numerical skills, the improvement is even more heartwarming, going from 25% to 33.7%. It is not to say that therefore nothing remains to be done. In fact, much remains to be done. The direction of progress is quite reassuring. When it comes to enrollment, I think India has fixed that problem mostly. Now we are focusing on the quality of educational outcomes, because up to middle school level enrollment is now almost 100%, up to high school it's about 80%, and up to secondary school it's about 60% or so. And in tertiary education we have a target of 50% and we are somewhere around 32%. So compared to where we were at the turn of the millennium in terms of enrollment, whether it is in school education or higher education, we have witnessed significant progress, so we can now focus more on educational outcomes. The number of educational institutions, whether it is universities, colleges, or medical seats, etc., all of them have expanded, so more details can be found in those chapters 11 to 13. Now, macro fundamentals, inclusive parameters are also backed up by digital and in terms of project execution. If you look at the project approvals by the PPP Appraisal Committee, which was barely less than 9,000 crores in FY23, now it's more than 1 lakh crores, and that too up to November only. The number of operational high-speed corridors in terms of length of kilometers in highways, just 550 kilometers, improved to 5,360 kilometers, and that too only up to December. The commissioning of railway networks from 1,500 to more than doubling to 3,100 plus. Port infrastructure having gone up in terms of cargo handled and the capacity of ports in terms of tonnage, the numbers speak for themselves. What is interesting to me when I was putting the survey together was the one on the bottom right. The growth of inland water transport as a very viable means of transporting people and goods. The growth rate of freight handled or goods handled by inland water transportation went from 18 million metric tons to 146 in the last 11 years, recording a compounded annual growth rate of 21%, and that's very impressive. So we are now tapping all sources of transportation mode to power economic activity in the country. Digital connectivity. India has a very steep decline in data costs compared to any other country in the world. Perhaps we are the cheapest, and of course I would consider it a mixed blessing in different ways, and you will see later why it's a mixed blessing. Number of broadband subscribers has gone up from 6 crores to 100 crores, And in terms of the Department of Telecom, in terms of deregulation processes, the application approval time for centralized right-of-way portals has come down by 90% from 450 days to just 40 days. And in terms of rural connectivity, more than 13,000 towers operational, nearly 20,000 villages with 4G mobile, and 2.1 lakh gram panchayats connected with broadband. And therefore, given the good growth performance and the kind of foundation laid for sustained growth into the second half of this decade, we are now projecting FY27 growth at between 6.8 and 7.2%. So therefore, your midpoint is 7% on top of the growth rates we have achieved post-COVID, with the most recent estimate being 7.4 for FY26. So in other words, we are projecting, notwithstanding the global situation, we are projecting on the back of domestic accomplishments and domestic reforms that the growth momentum is intact. And we will be able to grow at between 6.8 and 7.2% in real terms. We are aware that the base year revision will be announced in the end of February, and we are confident that we will be able to maintain this growth rate under the new base year and data from MOSPI. Now, having talked about the performance of the economy, which gives us a very strong foundation, we go to the part 2 of this presentation. We look at the issues of long-term importance to the Indian economy, which are covered in detail in the economic survey. First, the outcome of rising global uncertainty for the country is the effect on the capital account and therefore on the currency. As an emerging market and a capital importing country, developments in India's external account reflects the impact of the rise in global uncertainty. India's gross FDI has been growing very well. In FY26, gross FDI is at least 10% higher than last year, but net FDI has been on the weaker side, partly because of profit-taking by investors who have invested in the earlier decades, and also because of the compulsion that Indian businesses face to invest overseas. So ODI by Indian businesses has also increased. So as a result, net FDI numbers are not where we would like them to be, although they are not alarming. Portfolio investors have various reasons. One is the valuation and the lack of a so-called AI story in India, and also the overall uncertainty caused by the tariff situation is holding them back from committing more money into the Indian market. But as a contrarian, when sentiment towards India is actually on the weaker side, that is when the future prospective returns will look the brightest, actually. And if you look at the currency, therefore, as a country that depends on imported capital to meet a current account deficit, even though the deficit itself is on the lower side, if capital flows become weaker, naturally the currency reflects that. And that is what we have seen in the last 1 year, with the rupee weakening against the dollar by about 6 to 7%. This is in spite of the stellar economic fundamentals we have. So it has got nothing to do with the macro picture. It is simply accounting that if you are a current account deficit country, you need to import capital. And when capital flows become weaker due to global factors, remember, in the second decade, interest rates were close to zero in the developed world. They are now between 4 and 5% as well. So the opportunity cost of investing overseas is higher. So that is what shows up in the currency, and it is not a reflection of the macroeconomic fundamentals. The second issue that we need to tackle is long-term fiscal sustainability will require consistency in center's efforts, which we have seen demonstrated in the last 5 years, and also prudence and commitment on the part of the states. The Centre's Special Assistance Scheme for Capital Investments has incentivized states, without which their capex would be lower, and with that it is 2.4% of GDP, and the fiscal deficit, including SASCI funds, it's 3.2, and without that it's 2.8, well contained without SASCI. But overall, the goal is to bring down the ultimate combined fiscal deficit in the medium to long term to 6% of GDP. The unconditional fiscal transfers that many states are pursuing today do have a very useful short-term role. They put cash in the hands of the public, raises disposable income, and increases spending power, no doubt. However, sustaining growth will require a careful reprioritization so that short-term income support doesn't erode the very investments on which inclusive medium-term prosperity ultimately rests. This is a quote directly from the chapter. And therefore, any fiscal indiscipline at the state level is also lately casting a shadow on the sovereign borrowing cost. The 10-year bond yield is 6.7%, and a similarly rated Indonesian 10-year bond yield is 6.3%. And therefore, since India has gotten into the bond indices globally, those investors look at the general government deficit and not just the union government deficit. That is why I think it's important that states also begin to walk on the path of fiscal prudence and consolidation in the years to come. The other priority is agriculture. In fact, in the global environment that we are getting into, all three engines of the economy, agriculture, manufacturing, services, have to fire together. And they are doing that in allied areas. Livestock and fishing and agriculture have grown at more than 6 and 7% in the last 5 years. Traditional crops can match them. If they do so, agricultural GVA will be much faster than what we are experiencing, around 3 to 4% today. And the chapter goes into what are the various steps we can take, starting from rebalancing the fertilizer consumption, looking at rice and wheat procurement to encourage crop diversification for the sake of nutrition, for the sake of soil fertility, for the sake of water tables, etc. We can take a look at how we can, through policies, encourage crop diversification. So these are all the important issues we need to address to get the overall gross value addition up in agricultural sector. From agriculture, naturally, we move on to food. And this is from the National Family Health Survey 4. The 5 will be released soon, I think. But the important thing is, Indian obesity is a major issue for reaping the demographic dividend. Physical health, mental health, emotional health, all three factors are necessary apart from skilling and education for the country to be able to reap the demographic dividend. So this economic survey, while in the last 2 surveys we have focused much more on mental health, this time we also focus on the physical health aspect. And one early and easy step that the private sector can take is to allow food labeling to reflect the risks of what people are consuming. So compared to other countries in the region and globally, Indian food labeling can improve so that people can make conscious choices in what they eat, etc. And therefore, obesity is an important factor, and it will not be addressed only by government efforts. It requires citizens' consciousness and private sector cooperation as well. So when I spoke about the data cost being the lowest in the world, I said it's a mixed blessing, and here it is why. Compulsive scrolling and social comparison is linked to anxiety and depressive symptoms, and we have been covering it in the previous 2 economic surveys, and we continue to do so. But we are very happy to note that Andhra Pradesh government is contemplating restricting social media for children under 16, so is the Goan government, etc. But it is again a matter of policy and conscious choices to be made by citizens themselves, because exposure to screen time, sedentary lifestyle, ultra-processed food consumption increase the risk of anxiety and suicidal thoughts significantly among our adolescents and also in the people in the early working age population as well. And this is a silent scourge, and we need to fix that if we are going to achieve our long-term growth aspirations.